Hello, these are the out-of-class essay guidelines. Please use these guidelines when writing your essays for my English classes. These guidelines will help you to write strong academic essays. These guidelines are not necessarily, not at all, frankly, for creative writing or for many other types of writing, but they do work in a school environment. The format items are all basically about physical layout of your paper. Now, if you're doing an online class, certain issues, of course, don't really apply. The first, of course, which does not apply, is the paper itself. Number one, 8.5 by 11 white typing paper. However, if you are in a class of mine where you are turning in physical copies, please use regular white paper, nothing fancy, nothing color, no scratch paper. 1-inch margins, top, left, right, bottom. Typically that's the default for most computers, unless some evil hacker has gotten into your computer and changed those margins. Always make sure your papers are typewritten and double spaced. Proofread your paper for typos and obvious grammatical or spelling errors. Don't be afraid to mark up your final draft after you've printed it out, if it's impractical for you to do any additional changes. Now, of course, if you're in the online environment, you have up until the last moment before a paper is due to make those changes. Your name, the instructor's name, the class number, and due date of the work should be in the upper left-hand corner of the first page. If this is not clear in what it looks like, consult your syllabus, because my syllabi always have an example template which will show you. Always give your essay a title. The title should be content related. Don't say essay number 1, essay number 2. Also, if you're doing a literature paper, don't use the same name as what you're writing about. Don't write a paper about King Lear and just call it King Lear. That title is taken. The title of the work should be centered on the page, double spaced down from the due date and double spaced above the start of the actual text. Never underline your own title and close it in quotation marks. Do not bold it. Do not change font sizes or types. Do capitalize the first letter of each important word, including the first and last words of the title. Do not use a title page unless I specifically request one, and I think in 33 years I never have. Make sure you number all the pages with your last name and page number, including the first page, even if you're only using one page total. This should be in the upper right-hand corner of your essay. Again, you can see this on the template attached to your syllabus. Again, if this is a situation where you're turning in hard copies, please make sure they're bound in some manner, preferably with a paper clip or a staple. I will not accept loose sheets. So that's all the physical layout. Style is where things get a little trickier. Style is about the use of language. It begins with some fairly obvious bits of advice. Know how to spell all names, terms, and words. Do not rely blindly on spell check programs. Especially with names, spell checkers are notorious. They do not recognize names. They recognize some names, but what if your name is Johnston and not Johnson? Spell checker will probably say, no, it should be Johnson. You need to make sure that all the names are spelled correctly. All the words and terms are spelled correctly. As for grammar check programs, they can be helpful sometimes, and other times they create chaos. Remember, your computer does not actually speak English. It may pretend to, but it doesn't. You speak English. So if something doesn't look right to you, I'm betting more often than not that you're right, not your computer. Point number 9 says think twice about using first or second person pronouns in your essays. We are writing academic essays, not personal narratives, not journal pieces, not diary entries. Get rid of the I, get rid of the you. Use only third person pronouns, he, she, it, they. Do not use colloquialisms. Colloquialisms are everyday non-standard English. Everybody knows what you mean, but in academic writing, we like to be a little bit more formal. So don't say how education reform is going to help kids. Talk about how it helps children. Slang, of course, should be avoided. Slang is exclusionary language, creates in-groups and out-groups, the people who understand the slang and people who don't understand the slang. Avoid cliches. Cold as ice, right, is a classic cliche. Even worse to me are cliches of ideas. When students write, you need to write something that's interesting, not something that everybody has done 100,000 times before you. Avoid the cliched topic. Number 11 says avoid the use of contractions. Now there's nothing evil or illegal about contractions, but again, if you're trying to write a little bit more formally, the use of a contraction is a great way to do that. Excuse me, not using a contraction, pardon me. Do not use contractions. Do not, as opposed to don't. Number 12, avoid using parentheses except when required for documentation. Usually a pair of commas will do the same job better. So obviously, as you probably know, MLA does use parentheses for documentation purposes, putting in author name and page number, for example. I'm not talking about that. What I am talking about is when people decide to whisper. Well, that little whisper is more like a shout when you use parentheses. Okay, it kind of stops the writing. And if you're reading this, you go, oh, parentheses, what's going on here? A pair of commas, on the other hand, is a much better way to handle a pause within a sentence, but not a huge pause, not a big pause, just a soft pause. Number 13 says avoid using gross abstractions. An abstraction is a concept, right? An idea. Gross means large. It doesn't mean icky. So when you say things like the reality of life or view of the world, it sounds very impressive at first, but it really doesn't mean very much. It doesn't mean very much at all, in fact. Number 14. Avoid sounding certain that your opinion is unquestionably correct. We all probably can think of certain individuals, famous or otherwise, who think everything they say is the only way to look at the world. The only proper interpretation is, right? Very annoying. On the other hand, some people play it so far in the other direction that they're never saying anything at all. It may be possible, and there's some circumstances that might occur. So be positive, make your case, but don't be extreme. If you're always saying this is my way and that my way is the only way, you're going to be wrong. If you don't say anything at all, well, what's the point? Make a statement. Number 15 says avoid using the passive voice, use the active voice. Now this is a grammar term, passive voice. It refers to the use of subjects and verbs and objects. A normal English language sentence, I say normal, I should say the active voice, which is kind of the default, which is why I called it normal. The default way of communicating in English is through the active voice. If I were to say, Tom threw the ball, Tom is the subject, threw is the verb, ball is the direct object, something does something to something else. That's the active voice, and it is the most common way in which we express ourselves in English. On the other hand, I can turn that around. I can say, the ball was thrown by Tom. The object, which is the ball, in the active voice, is now the subject. The ball was thrown by Tom. It puts the emphasis on the receiver of the action and de-emphasizes the doer, in this case, Tom. And in truth, I can get rid of Tom. I can just say, the ball was thrown. In the passive voice, I do not actually have a doer of the action. Right? Now, there are reasons we have the passive voice, because sometimes we don't know the doer of the action, or it's unimportant. If I were to say, the victim had been strangled, I don't know who the perpetrator is yet. I don't know who the killer is, but I'm not emphasizing that. I'm emphasizing the victim and what happened to that victim. But sometimes passive voice is used to hide the doer. Mistakes were made. Well, who made those mistakes? It's not given. So passive voice hides the doer and is wordier, generally speaking, right? The ball was thrown by Tom is a longer sentence than saying Tom threw the ball. So try to use the active voice whenever possible. Passive voice is okay when you do not have a doer. Number 16 says avoid using it, especially when the antecedent is unclear. Now the word antecedent stands for whatever the it is substituting for, right? All pronouns substitute for a noun. So what is the it? The problem with the word it particularly is it's so bland, so vague, so mysterious. And a lot of writers, let's say, people who are not careful with their writing, tend to overuse it, lose track of what the antecedent is, and in fact shift antecedents without introducing that new noun first. Number 17 says, do not tell the reader what you're going to do, just do it. It's what I call the Nike advice. Do not say things to me like, in this essay I will be discussing. I will redline that out. Number 18, do not ask questions, answer them. I don't like questions. I like statements. The problem with a question is it opens the door to disagreement. Even if you say, well, I'm going to answer the question right afterwards, well, but you've already posed a question. And at the speed of light, a reader will be thinking different things. Make the statement. Number 19 says, when using outside sources, document the material properly with MLA documentation. Because this is an English class, we use MLA. Do not write papers of single sentence paragraphs. Do not write overly long paragraphs. There is no particular size to a paragraph, but what it does is it fulfills all the ideas, explores all the issues connected to whatever was stated in that topic sentence. Number 21 says be sure to meet all minimum requirements. Every essay I assign has minimum requirements, whether it's a source count, whether it's word count, whether it's source types. Just make sure that you've done that. I talk about that in the syllabus as well. Always just include a word count at the end of your essay. That word count does not include the works cited page or any other extra type materials. If you fall short of the word requirement, go back and make certain you've said everything that you can say. And number 23 says proofread, proofread, proofread. It's everybody's least favorite part of the writing process, but you really need to do it. Now, three more items for those of you taking a literature course. When writing an essay, always make sure that you mention the titles and authors of the works that you're writing about in the introduction to your paper. That is the first paragraph of your essay, so we know what you're doing. Number 25, do not tell whether you liked the story unless that's part of the assignment. And I don't think I've ever made that part of an assignment. Do not compliment the author. When you start complimenting the author, what that tells me is you actually have nothing to say. And the wonderful work by the genius writer is so amazing, right? No. You're not kidding anybody. And number 26, do not retell the plot of the story. If you're writing a paper for my class, you're analyzing the story. You may assume that your reader has familiarity with the story, but you must analyze the story for the reader along the assigned question. Now, you may have to, of course, raise particular plot points. That's obvious. But if it's just a paper where it says, and then, that's not what we want to see. That is not analysis. So please look over these guidelines. Keep them. You may want to use them in additional classes as you go forward in your academic career. Again, my caveat is this is for academic purposes. And if you have a teacher who tells you to do something differently in the future, then obviously you want to do whatever that teacher told you to do. Thank you.